It is with great sorrow that I share the passing of our spiritual leader, Pope Francis. His death marks more than just the end of a papacy. It signals the unfolding of a centuries-old prophecy hidden deep within the Vatican's most secretive archives, the prophecy of Saint Malachy. Nearly 9 centuries ago, as Brother Malachy wandered through the streets of Rome, he was suddenly struck by a powerful vision. It wasn't a dream or illusion. It was a glimpse into the distant future of the Catholic Church. In a trance-like state, he witnessed something unimaginable. A long line of popes, one after the other, stretching forward through the ages until the final days. He recorded what he saw in a series of 112 short Latin phrases. Each one contained a symbol and a warning for every pope to come, up to the last, number 112, known as Peter the Roman. According to Malachy, after this pope, no others would follow. Only divine judgment would remain. And today, with the death of Pope Francis, the final name has been fulfilled. From the time of Celestine II to now, Pope Francis was the 112th, just as Malachy had predicted. The prophetic chain that began centuries ago has now come to its final link. The first 111 phrases were short and filled with symbolic language, often capturing details like a pope's background, personality, or destiny with uncanny precision. But the message for the last pope was different. It wasn't brief or poetic. It was a grim and detailed warning. Malachy wrote that during the last great trial of the Holy Roman Church, a man called Peter the Roman would lead the faithful through many hardships. When these struggles end, the city of 7 hills, Rome, will fall, and a terrible judge will rise to pass judgment on all. The prophecy ends there, signed simply, Malachy. This chilling message gives us 3 signs about the final pope. First, that he would be the 112th. Second, that his name would be Peter. Third, that he would come from Rome. And lastly, that his time would be filled with great turmoil. There's no doubt Francis is the 112th pope since Celestine II, just as Saint Malachy foretold. For many years, people expected the final pope to be clearly named Peter and born in Rome, an identity that would be easy to recognize. But like many ancient prophecies, Malachy's message was wrapped in symbolism. Now, with hindsight, the pieces fall into place in an eerily perfect way. Pope Francis was born in a humble home in the Flores district of Buenos Aires. While his birthplace was Argentina, his roots tell a different story. His family was Italian. His parents came from the Piedmont region in northern Italy. They escaped a country torn apart by fascism and economic hardship, hoping to give their children a better life in Argentina. This means that Francis carried Roman blood, a deep connection to the city at the center of the Catholic faith, not by location, but by heritage and spirit. His birth name was Jorge Mario Bergoglio, not Peter, but something happened when he was chosen to become pope. He was asked what name he would take, and without hesitation he answered, Francis. He didn't pick a name tied to power or doctrine. Instead, he chose the name of Saint Francis of Assisi, the saint known for embracing the poor and sick, walking barefoot, and rebuilding the church with nothing but love and faith. What many forget is that Saint Francis's real name was Giovanni di Pietro di Bernardone. Giovanni, son of Pietro, son of Peter, a name filled with deep symbolism. In every way, Pope Francis became the person described in the ancient prophecy. He was the 112th pope. He carried the symbolic name of Peter, and his ancestry tied him to Rome. But the prophecy didn't end there. It also warned that this final shepherd would guide his people through difficult times. Francis's time as pope was far from peaceful. It wasn't marked by triumph or religious revival, but by hardship, just as predicted. His spiritual path began with pain. As a young man, he was suddenly struck by sharp pain in his side. Soon after, a high fever followed, and breathing became harder with each passing moment. His lungs refused to fill with air. His parents rushed him to the hospital in panic. Doctors examined him carefully, their faces heavy with concern. The diagnosis was devastating: a serious lung infection full of cysts. The infection had already spread, causing irreversible damage to one lung. There was no other option. Part of his lung had to be removed. The operation was dangerous, and the healing process long and painful. He spent days in bed, weak and surrounded by medical machines and sterile silence. But in that quiet hospital room, something profound happened. For the first time, he came to understand how fragile life truly is. He realized his body was not beyond harm, that death could come at any moment. But instead of fear, he felt a strange sense of peace. While others prayed for his recovery, he asked for something else, for understanding, for a reason behind the suffering. He didn't beg for the pain to stop. Instead, he hoped it could mean something greater. That experience changed him deeply. From then on, he knew that every breath was a gift. And if he had been allowed to live, it could only mean that his journey wasn't finished, that there was still a purpose waiting for him. Just a few months after recovering from his illness, even though his body was still weak and breathing remained difficult, he made a life-changing decision. He would dedicate himself completely to God. From the very beginning of his papacy, Francis was met with strong resistance. For the first time in the Church's history, the Pope wasn't European, and he came from the Jesuit order. He stepped into leadership at a time when the Church was reeling, overwhelmed by waves of sexual abuse scandals that had erupted around the world. Survivors began to speak out. Public outrage grew. The demand for accountability could no longer be brushed aside. Francis faced the crisis head-on. He never tried to soften the truth. He apologized publicly and sincerely. He met with victims and shed tears beside them. Then he took action, launching a serious effort to bring about reform and break the long-standing cycle of silence. But the road was anything but smooth. Each case was tied to a legacy of cover-ups, powerful institutions resistant to change, and secret networks that fought to keep things hidden. And just as that wound was being confronted, another emerged. The Church itself started to fracture from within. Rifts between bishops and cardinals became more visible. Sharp divides formed between traditionalists and reformers, and there was growing doubt and distrust aimed at the Vatican's leadership. During a press conference on his way back from his first apostolic trip to Brazil, Francis said something that would spark fierce debate. If someone is gay and seeks God with a sincere heart, who am I to judge? To many, this was a message of compassion, but to conservative voices in the Church, it was seen as dangerous. They labeled him vague, overly liberal, even accused him of diluting Church doctrine. Some members of the clergy went as far as publishing public letters demanding that he explain himself. Some even went as far as calling him a heretic, though no proof was ever offered. Critics compared him to past reformers like Paul VI, John XXIII, and even Martin Luther. But Francis never responded, never tried to justify himself. Instead, he kept moving forward, calm, composed and resolute, driven by a deep sense of purpose. He hadn't taken on the role of Pope to win approval. He came to serve, and he believed that any real transformation would bring discomfort before it could bring healing. Through every challenge, he stayed true to his mission. Francis believed the future of the Church wasn't in isolation, but in embracing openness. He kept returning to a word that made some uneasy: synodality. For him, it meant a church that walks forward together, united in reflection, seeking guidance as one body. A church not ruled solely from above, but one where the Holy Spirit is heard through all voices. He championed the voices of lay people, of women, of those usually left on the sidelines. He imagined a church less focused on hierarchy and more on shared responsibility. A church that truly welcomed those who had long been excluded, migrants, the divorced, women and others pushed to the margins. This wasn't just policy, it was about deep spiritual renewal. Some thought he was too soft, others thought he was too harsh. Online debates magnified every statement he made, every move he took. But the tensions he faced weren't limited to internal church debates. His leadership unfolded during one of the most chaotic and unpredictable times in recent history. The world around Pope Francis was anything but stable. Wars like the one in Ukraine erupted. Christians faced violence and oppression in parts of the East, and crises, climatic, financial and spiritual, spread across the globe. The Church also found itself at odds with a culture that seemed to grow more distant from faith. Then, in 2020, the world came to a halt. The pandemic shut down churches, paused pilgrimages, and silenced once busy cities. In one of the most haunting images of the time, Pope Francis stood alone in the rain in an empty St. Peter's Square, facing the Eucharist under the open sky. That moment, heavy with silence and sorrow, mirrored the pain and uncertainty that blanketed the world. But on that bleak night, when it felt like even God had gone quiet, Francis lifted his voice and reminded the world they were not alone. That single act became one of the most unforgettable moments of his papacy. At a time when fear and loss were overwhelming, he stayed firm in faith. Even as churches emptied and doubts grew louder, he held his ground. In one of his boldest moves, he traveled to Iraq, a place marked by violence and division where no pope had ever gone. There, he met with leaders of both Islam and Christianity, urging unity and a shared future built on peace, not fear. He reached out to leaders of all Abrahamic faiths, Muslim, Jewish, and Orthodox. In a landmark meeting, he embraced the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, the top authority in Sunni Islam. Together, they signed a remarkable document on human fraternity, calling for peace, mutual respect, and justice that transcends religious lines. Francis also strengthened ties with Jewish communities, affirming the bond between faiths and the importance of remembering the Holocaust. He shed tears at Auschwitz and embraced survivors, honoring their stories and their pain. His efforts extended to the Orthodox world too. He deepened relationships with the Patriarch of Constantinople and also reached out to the Patriarch of Moscow, working to heal divisions that had lasted for centuries. In Cuba, something historic took place, a powerful moment as Pope Francis met and embraced Patriarch Kirill of Moscow, the first such meeting between the leaders of the Roman Catholic and Russian Orthodox churches in over 1,000 years. But Francis's time as Pope was never marked by ease or comfort. From the beginning, he knew that the 21st century would bring challenges as deep and difficult as any the Church had faced before. Still, he led with courage. Even in the midst of darkness, he moved forward. He pushed for reform, condemned injustice, stood with the outcasts, and spoke truth to power. But guiding the Church wasn't a gentle task. It was met with tension, pushback, and constant pressure. His approach was different, and it made waves. He refused to wear the traditional red cape. He chose not to live in the papal palace. He spoke in everyday language rather than Latin. He didn't rule through authority. He listened. From the start, Francis embraced his identity as the Pope of Mercy. His episcopal motto, Miserando atque eligendo, translates to, "He looked upon him with mercy and chose him." These words refer to the moment when Jesus saw Matthew, a tax collector and sinner, and called him to follow. It reflected Francis's belief. While sin must be acknowledged, the sinner should never be rejected. Instead of punishment, he offered compassion. He urged the faithful to trade judgment for understanding. He sent out special missionaries, priests given permission to forgive even sins normally reserved for the Pope alone. He called on confessors to be like loving fathers, not stern judges. Mercy, not fear, became the heart of his message. Pope Francis went where few dared. He visited prisons, hospitals, and refugee shelters. He bent down to wash the feet of immigrants, women, and people of different faiths. Through his actions, his words, and even his silences, he delivered a single message: mercy is not a sign of weakness. It is the most powerful form of love. And this image of love and compassion was the face of Christ that Francis longed to show the world. The prophecy had said that Peter the Roman would guide his people through great trials. That has been the very essence of Francis's papacy. And now, as foretold, it has reached its conclusion. But the prophecy doesn't stop there. It ends with a chilling declaration. When all these things have come to pass, the city built on 7 hills will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will deliver judgment. The end. This ominous line doesn't just mark the close of a list. It signals the end of an age. The city of 7 hills isn't just a poetic phrase, it's a clear reference. In the book of Revelation, chapter 17, there is mention of a woman seated on 7 hills. The 7 heads are the 7 hills, it says. There's no doubt which city this points to. It is Rome, the very same Rome Saint Malachy spoke of, the city said to face destruction after the last pope's reign. But that destruction may not be physical. It may come not from fire or conflict, but from something less visible, something spiritual, a collapse from within, a moral and symbolic fall. And perhaps the heart of the prophecy isn't about doom at all. It's a final caution, a warning meant to awaken, not simply to condemn. The prophecy ends with a solemn warning. The terrible judge will bring judgment, not only to those who have done wrong, but also to the faithful. This suggests a time of reckoning for everyone. The prophecy of Saint Malachy isn't just about doom, it's a wake-up call. Though many have dismissed it as myth or superstition, its uncanny accuracy has caused even some doubters to reconsider. The list begins with Pope Celestine II, elected in 1143. Malachy described him as ex castro Tiberis, from the castle of the Tiber. This wasn't a vague metaphor. Celestine's real name was Guido di Castello, and he was born near the Tiber River. He served in a church located close to Castel Sant'Angelo, right by that same river in Rome. Not a poetic symbol, an exact match. Even in modern times, the predictions held up. When John Paul I was elected in 1978, the prophecy named him De Medietate Lunae, of the half moon. He took office during a half moon. Just 33 days later, he died suddenly, again under a half moon in the sky. His papacy was brief and mysterious. To this day, his sudden death sparks speculation and unanswered questions. But one thing is clear: the prophecy described it with eerie precision. For his successor, John Paul II, the prophecy used the phrase de labore solis, of the sun's labor, or the eclipse of the sun. Karol Wojtyła, known to the world as John Paul II, was born during a solar eclipse. He also passed away on April 8, 2005, under the shadow of another eclipse. His life seemed to mirror the journey of the sun, relentless, radiant, and unstoppable. He traveled more than any pope before him, spreading faith across every corner of the globe. He became a beacon of unity, endurance, and hope. A tireless sun, shining until the very end. But the prophecy continued. Pope Benedict XVI was associated with the phrase Gloria Olivae, the glory of the olive. Some linked this to the Benedictine order, long symbolized by the olive branch, a sign of peace and spiritual depth. Others saw it reflected in Benedict's quiet, contemplative nature and the thoughtful calm of his theology. Even the name he chose, Benedict, seemed to echo the prophecy, as if he himself was acknowledging its truth. These aren't random coincidences. Time and again, Malachy's prophecies have aligned with history, personalities, and moments in striking ways. What once seemed like symbolic poetry now reads like a map, a guide traced across centuries. According to the prophecy, the last pope would be the final protector of the Church before judgment begins. But the death of Pope Francis hasn't just closed a chapter, it's opened something far more unsettling. A crack has formed, one that releases doubt and unease into the world like a quiet, creeping shadow. Because if Pope Francis truly was the final pope Malachy described, what lies ahead is not just another conclave, it is a step into the unknown. Now, the world is left to wonder, will a true successor rise, or will Peter's seat be claimed by someone unworthy? For many, the answer is already taking shape. They fear that whoever comes next won't be a shepherd leading with compassion, but a wolf hiding beneath a gentle disguise. Those who study prophecy and the book of Revelation often arrive at a chilling conclusion. The one who follows Francis may not be a true successor, but the false prophet described in Revelation chapter 13. He will appear gentle, devout, even holy, yet the words from his mouth will echo deception and destruction. He had 2 horns like a lamb, but spoke like a dragon. This figure won't lead with truth, he will lead to mislead. And now, urgent questions arise, questions that can no longer be dismissed. If Pope Francis was the final shepherd, then who takes the reins now? Could this new figure be the one who sets the stage for the Antichrist? The prophecy of Saint Malachy is not an isolated prediction. Scripture has echoed the same warnings for centuries. In his letter to the Thessalonians, the Apostle Paul wrote that before the final day there would be a great rebellion, and a man of sin would be revealed. Even Jesus, in Matthew 24, warned his followers of what was to come. He said the world would be shaken by wars, famines, diseases, and earthquakes, calling them the beginning of birth pains. And we need only open our eyes. We see global pandemics, increasing natural disasters, growing threats of war, and a silent decay of morality and spiritual truth. These aren't random events. They form a pattern. For years, such verses seemed far off, warnings for another time. But now, after the death of Francis, they feel immediate, pressing, real. It's all been foretold. Betrayal of faith, the unveiling of the deceiver, a false figure who claims to be sent by God, yet carries a hidden purpose. Still, even in the deepest night, light endures. Even as shadows gather, hope remains. The death of Pope Francis may signal the end of a chapter, but it is not the end of faith. Because real faith doesn't die with any one person. True belief goes beyond individuals. It survives. It strengthens, especially in times of difficulty. Now more than ever, this isn't a moment for fear. It's a call to wake up, to shake off indifference, to return to God with sincerity, humility, and urgency. We may not know what lies ahead, but we do know who holds the future in his hands. Stay alert, for you do not know the day or the hour. Francis didn't leave behind towering monuments or grand palaces. He left behind something far more powerful, something that cannot be torn down, a legacy. He was the Pope who broke with tradition, who stepped off the papal platform to walk among the people. He chose to listen rather than command. He valued honesty over popularity, truth over convenience. His mission was to bring back the truest reflection of Christianity. He reminded us again and again, the face of God lives in the faces of those who suffer. Francis didn't transform the Church through policy alone, but by creating a culture of encounter. He made mercy the central message. He modeled humility in a time when ego speaks the loudest. He offered second chances in a world that's quick to condemn. He didn't aim for a church that was distant or detached, but one that was compassionate, present, and real. Through his example, the Church began to remember what it had always been about: Jesus. One thing is undeniable. Pope Francis is gone. His task is complete. After a life filled with trials, with courage, with purpose, he has now returned home to meet his Creator. May his soul now find the peace he so often wished upon the world. May the gates of heaven open wide to receive him. Rest well, Francis. Amen.